Welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Sunday, April the 19th. We're coming very close to the end of our reading through the Gospel of Matthew, and Matthew is helping us to approach the end as well, as we're looking at chapter 26, which begins, "When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to the disciples." Finished saying all these things, the time for teaching is over. That last great block of teaching of Jesus regarding the end of the age and the parables surrounding that is at an end. And now we enter the Passion narrative, the Passion Week. And Jesus introduces us to that as well with verse 2. "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." So now we know what's coming. What's going to happen? How does Jesus end up being crucified? Well, we're told right away. The chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. In fact, we have Caiaphas's burial box, which was discovered some years ago. Caiaphas was a real character, a real person in the life of Israel. They gathered in his palace, and it says, "And they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival," they said, "or there may be a riot among the people." Oftentimes, it is supposed that there was no authority to put Jesus to death without going to the Romans. Well, they went to the Romans so that they wouldn't have the blame for putting Jesus to death. And they certainly didn't want that blame in Passover when the city was crowded with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, many of whom supported Jesus, or at least supported the idea of Jesus as Palm Sunday revealed. And so they needed to do things quietly and quickly if it was going to be done at all. And to do that, they needed an insider on the job, and they're about to find him. But first we have a dinner party. And the dinner party is happening in Bethany. Bethany is where Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha live, but they're at the home of Simon the leper, who's there. And while they're there, we read a woman came to Jesus with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. This was an extravagant gesture, to be sure, and a surprise at any dinner party. But the disciples were upset because of the amount of money that was represented in this very extravagant act. Why this waste, they asked? This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. And that's a very admirable goal indeed. Sometimes we question people's decision or their largesse in giving gifts and saying this could have been used for a better purpose. I'm sensitive to those issues as well. But Jesus says, "Why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing for me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." This seems to be an uncharacteristically callous statement of Jesus regarding the poor, since he had devoted his entire ministry and preaching to lifting up the cause of the poor. But what Jesus is doing, as he always does, is quoting the Old Testament, this time from Deuteronomy chapter 15. And I'm going to go there and read you a part of that section. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 7 through 15. "If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought that you're going to get your money back from them. Instead, give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to." Here comes the verse. "There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land." In quoting this verse, Jesus is affirming the need for us to continue to be generous to the poor. Nor is he taking that off the table as something that is central to our own ministry. He's just told the parable of the sheep and the goats. But he says something very tender here. He says, "When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial." Jewish burial customs involved the washing of the body and the anointing of the body with perfumes and spices. This was not an embalming ritual as it would be in Egypt. Instead, it was to make it less unpleasant for the family to visit the grave for the days following the funeral. As we know from the funeral of Lazarus, who's really involved in a side way in this story, On the fourth day of his death, when Jesus asked them to open the tomb to let Lazarus out, his sister was concerned. Lazarus' sister was concerned, saying, look, the body is going to smell. This is going to be unpleasant. And that's why perfumes and spices were used. Jesus knows very well that the end is coming quickly, and this is, in fact, his pre-burial meal and his pre-burial anointing. Doesn't mean we should forget the poor, but this is a special circumstance. Sadly, this is followed with Judas. One of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver, and from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. One of the sad things is, among the hundreds of sad things involved in the betrayal of Judas, is at the Last Supper, just a few verses later, down at verse 21, it says, while they were eating, Jesus said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, surely you don't mean me, Lord. Do you see that Judas wasn't suspected of treachery by the other disciples at this point? He is always included last when the list of disciples is given, but of course that's long after the fact. But as the event is building up, nobody is suspecting Judas as one of the candidates of betrayal. They think, is it me? Is it going to be me? When Judas betrays Jesus, it comes to the others as a complete surprise. Sadly, Jesus himself is not surprised. We read Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. But Jesus answered, you have said so. Jesus knows who it's going to be. But there is something still even more tender. And this brings us into far later in the chapter, in chapter 26. When Jesus is betrayed by Judas, in verse 50 we read, Jesus replied, do what you came for, friend. Even though betrayed, Jesus still calls Judas friend. That tells you a lot more about Jesus than it does about Judas. Our readings are quickly coming to an end. Tomorrow, on Monday, we're going to finish with the Great Commission, because we've covered this other aspect of the Gospel of Matthew in Easter week. But we'll be looking at Matthew 28 in the section called the Great Commission. Then we'll take a little bit of a breather and then start right in on the Gospel of Mark. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.